Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is Gardner Barrier, and we've just been introduced over the last 10 days, or not even 10 days, it's probably a week. And we're, I think we've been together, what, three times in a week? Now four. Glad to know you, Gardner, and appreciate all the things that you've done. So, what are you doing? What are you doing now? What's your thing now? And then we can kind of pick up the pieces from the past that also I think are relevant. But what are you up to now?
Yeah, great question. As a longtime school person and a longtime Winston-Salem person, I'd say to reference a local person and Gary Chapman and love languages, kind of a way I would express a love language is it just feels great when I can be helpful. And I've kind of got a Swiss Army knife kind of skill set of MBA, educator, thinker, writer, dreamer. So it's just fun to help people. And I was talking to a guy that a very 2026 story that I met through this AI agent called Bordy that's like a LinkedIn pro, basically, but it's AI. And so this guy got introduced, his name's Jonathan Bennett. He's up in Toronto. And he similarly is kind of climbing the next mountain. He was a healthcare executive for a number of years, and now he's a coach, advisor. And the last conversation I had with him, well, two conversations, I actually talked with him this morning, but two conversations ago, we were talking about how being a an executive coach at times isn't the right title because sometimes it's advice, sometimes it's consulting, sometimes it's mentoring. And he was saying over his, I think he's been at it 7 or 8 years now with his practice, so longer than I have, that instead of worrying about the jargon, it's, hey, leadership is hard. Decisions can be challenging. How can I help? And it's like, there you go. So what I'm up to is helping people in a variety of ways. Some of that is school related, given my background. Yesterday, I was out at a friend's farm helping them think through a financial dashboard. So again, wide ranging. And amidst all of that, the thing that sparked our first conversation, having more margin in my life right now to write. I've written and journaled for 3 decades and had little fits and starts of things on my computer and in my legal pads and so forth. So it's been nice to also in this season have an opportunity, and what we have in common with Substack and the ability to publish is just kind of sharing some things that again hopefully are useful and helpful. So across written form, podcast, anything I'm doing, I'm hoping that it's useful and it feels really good to be useful. So that's a bit about me. The moniker of kind of coach consultant doesn't quite capture it. So I'm glad you asked that question, and I'm glad you let me answer it in kind of a long-winded way.
It sounds like you're more of a catalyst than any of those things, because those other things kind of feel like there's a level of passivity to them, and you don't seem to be a very passive person.
Well, thank you. I hope that's true. And um, at times, consulting, for instance, can be very project focused. There's this deliverable, and I'm way more relational in my approach. So to your point, it's hey, you've got me. How can I help you? And less focused on this happens to be a dashboard for a farm or some coaching or strategic plan, and more just, all right, how do I get to know you and how can I help you thrive in the things you're attempting to, thrive within?
We're very similar in that way, and um, for me, it's um, every person I encounter, and if I walk out my front door and there's someone out there at the street, I'm going to go talk to them.
Mm.
That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to help them, but I'm going to at least talk to them. But out of that can come something, can become an idea, or it can say, well, have you thought about this? There's a place where you can go, or I know someone who can help you, if you're looking for this, that's the kind of catalytic thing that I see you are doing because you're a collection of resources captured in a single person.
Well, that's kind of you. And I think that's true. And I think, again, you and I have a lot in common. I remember it was a formative experience for me. Second year of college, I was in this experimental economics class. And the professor, it was a smaller class, 20 or so students. But the professor, Dr. Catherine Eckel, said, "Hey, can you stay after class?" And I was like, "Sure," And I didn't know if I'd, you know, I, annoyed her or done something, like said something inappropriate. I was like, Sure, I'll stay after class." And she quickly said, "It is so obvious that you're a social scientist. You just ask a lot of questions." I'm like, "I'm sorry. Am I speaking too much?" "No, I love it." And she went on to say she was in the process, early stages of starting an economics lab at Virginia Tech, where I went to college, that was in effect a social psychology kind of lab. Like, how do you make economic decisions? And long and the short of it, she wanted me to help her with that and do an independent study with her to help launch that. And in ways I couldn't predict, that was a huge moment in terms of me being affirmed as this broadly curious question kind of person. And professionally, I've done a lot with helping people shape independent studies and self-guided learning and so forth, which feels so applicable now with the multitude of ways, endless ways that people can access information and knowledge. And so that I'm grateful to Dr. Eckel. And back to your point of catalytic, yes, and just a social scientist. Like I imagine you and I have this in common that I have some, 30-second exchange with my neighbor and it plants a seed and it's like, all right, I'm going to come back to them and remind them of something, or this has application over here. And probably something we haven't, I think, we've gestured towards this. My brain's always going and connecting and doing. So I am absolutely terrible at sleep. It's just
Yes.
it's all
Oh
like
yeah. Oh yeah.
it's constantly and slowing that motor down and being able to rest is we all have our shortcomings. That is definitely one of mine.
I as soon as I feel fatigue coming on, I go to bed, even if it's 4 in the afternoon or 10 in the morning. I will do that, and I'll sleep an hour and get up, and I'm ready to go. And when I was writing my Circle of Impact book, that was my first book. I began to go to bed about 8:30, 9 o'clock, and then get up around 1 or 2 and work for 2 or 3 hours, and then go back to bed for a couple hours and get up and write. And that usually was writing until about 10 or 11 in the morning. And it worked really well. And to the point where I decided that my day started when I went to bed in the evening. And that the quality of my day was dependent on the quality of my sleep. And the earlier I got in bed to go to sleep, the better quality of my mind, a better quality of the work that I ended up doing when I woke up.
I love that. And again, back to a lot in common, almost to the minute or whatever. That sounds like last night for me, where I went to bed early. I woke up what most people would consider the middle of the night. I worked for a couple hours and finally could get back to sleep.
Yeah,
And it was pretty clear-minded, I was writing and it was, I read it this morning and went, you know, yeah, that's pretty good.
I lived in Jackson Hole for 6 years, and the hardest thing about living in Jackson Hole that the only place to go to in the middle of the night was a gas station. There are no all-night restaurants, or no, there was nothing open at night,
Mhm.
at 2 in the morning, and here you don't go to bars. The bars are not a healthy place to go at 2 in the morning, but at least we have Waffle House, and I've gone to Waffle House at many times at 2 in the morning, and you can have some pretty interesting conversations.
So here's a fun story for you that's related to Waffle House, 'cause totally agreed. And this is one of the first up close and personal experiences I had with a person close to me writing a book. So I worked with a guy named John, and his brother, older brother James, went by Jimmy. Um, and this is John and James Adams. And yes, that does trace up the tree to that John and John Quincy. Well, his brother Jimmy in I guess 2008 with the financial stuff got laid off from a financial job and just was frustrated by it and there are other dimensions and really sharp guy. So he wrote this really clever, I used this with my econ classes, this really clever economics book from the vantage point of while he worked at Waffle House. So the name of the book is Waffle Street, and it's
Oh
hilarious
my, I got to see this.
bec- because it's these like, 3 a.m. tales of Waffle House, and then it has like kind of this, you know, sidebar of, well, here's economic theory that it's just hilarious. They ended up making it a movie. It's on Netflix. I guess it still is. Danny Glover was the head cook at the Waffle House that Jimmy, the main character, worked for. But I agree. And again, his book makes me chuckle because it referenced his brother John that I worked with for years, and just I can think of stories involving my own brother and other people I know where like Waffle House is an interesting place at all hours, for sure.
So you spent a good portion of your career in education, and what was it that led you into that world?
So that's a fun question. So my grandmother, my dad's mom, was a kindergarten teacher and kind of started a family tradition, family business of sorts of being educators. So my dad's brother was a college professor for his career. My older brother and sister both are educators. A lot of my cousins and various people in my life are educators. I was kind of my kind of academic mentor in some regards was my dad's older brother. And he was really encouraging me in my college years, kind of keep going with econ. And I was looking at PhD programs. I ended up at UNC Greensboro because they had a terminal master's program in econ, and I had people I wanted to be kind of geographically closer to in North Carolina. And I had worked out with the dean of that program at UNCG, who was, I think, college roommates and professional colleagues, anyway, close with the dean of the PhD program at UVA, that, hey, I could apply these credits there and finish my PhD there. And then my first semester at UNCG, I went and was talking to the dean of the middle grades education program about, hey, I got sent over here. I'm an econ student. I do all this back to that econ lab that I helped start with Dr. Eckel. I do this research on how children make economic decisions. I'd love to get it into your middle schools, run some of these experiments, get some data. And he and I ended up talking about education, and my older brother at the time was a middle school director, and on and on. And long and the short of it, he said, "What if you dually enrolled? What if you joined this MEd program?" And it's not what I came here for, thanks. Give me the list of schools and let me get to contacting people. But the second conversation I had with him, I ended up saying, "Yeah, all right, I'm in." And I got my master's. I ended up not finishing the econ degree, and I did get my master's in education from UNCG. Did my student teaching the following year, got a first teaching job. My year of doing student teaching, I also kind of subbed at a private school that my cousins attended, Canterbury over in Greensboro. And I got to do everything from P to kindergarten to middle school. I mean, I did a little bit of everything. And it was a cool reentry to private school. So I got the opportunity the following year to go to a school called Westchester Country Day, was Westchester Academy over in High Point. And yeah, just kind of fell into it. My older brother's 13 years older. So as I tell people, I just kind of look at what he's doing and then I do it a decade later. So sure enough, he was a teacher and then a middle school director and then a head of school, and I've checked all those boxes. And then he stepped away from education and made guitars for a couple years, um, and now he's back in the math classroom. So I'm wondering what my I don't know how to make a guitar, so I'm wondering what my version of that will prove to be. But yeah, I kind of found my way into kind of my grandmother's tradition there that she started. At one point, I'm not going to get the numbers exactly right, but there's like 13 cousins on my dad's side, and like at one point, nine of us were in education.
Wow.
It's definitely the family business, and a lot of us married people and that were also in education. So there's a lot of educators.
And you were, if I saw one version of your resume, or I saw part of it. Let me just say, so you spent most of your time in private scholastic education.
I did. I spent, I guess, 25 years in independent schools, private independent schools, K-12, and then I guess 6 of those years I was also an adjunct teaching at Wake Forest after I finished my MBA there. So again, I've kind of taught at all levels, and when people ask me my like favorite age to teach, I really enjoy working with like my last few years of teaching classes. It was predominantly seniors and kind of in a civil discourse kind of class. I taught mostly math over the years, and I love teaching like sixth grade math, where they're just still these precious kids that just are goofball kids that are also starting to, be able to ask some really interesting questions and really starting to take themselves serious as thinkers. So I'd still probably answer that sixth grade's probably still. So to my point about my older brother, I don't know, maybe I'm about a decade away from going back to teaching sixth grade math and bringing it full circle as he's doing with his career.
I spent 15 years doing Boy Scouts, and
Hmm.
8 of those I was the scoutmaster of our troop up in Hendersonville. And what I found was that the scouts that went from Webelos, which is the last stage of
Yeah.
Cub Scouts, into being a Boy Scout, that those first 2 or 3 years when they were like 11, 12, 13 were the best years, because they would come in and they would see the entire world as theirs.
Yeah.
I want it all. I want to understand it all. I want to have it. Of course, they're not going to have it all, but that's where they want it, because it's like they were being released from some kind of constraint, and now they could go anywhere they wanted to go.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that resonates. And it's fun watching. I remember for a couple of years, I taught this eighth grade global studies class, and it was so fun encouraging people at that age and stage to think, beyond themselves and the light bulb moments that they had when they did so. And knowing that developmentally they were picturing themselves, like where did they fit in that? So pretty interesting. Thanks.
Excuse me. Do you have a sense about what parents need to do with their preschool kids to prepare them for um, really accelerating their learning in the primary school level? Because I
Gosh,
think
that's a good question.
well, I have a grandson who's 3, and I have a grandson who's on the way. He'll be born in November. So I'm thinking, what do I do with my grandchildren that my daughter and her husband are not doing, to encourage their development?
Hmm.
And so that's where my question is coming from.
Yeah, and I love it because we're in such a moment of post-COVID, the things that schools and educators are having to explicitly teach back to just socialization skills, right? Like the play dates are just different than they used to be. So there's a lot of that of just how to let your kid engage with other kids and play and explore and I guess I would say similar intellectually that there's the emotional side of that. There's also just like the exposure to words, right? I mean, as simple as it is, uh, there's various studies that point to this back to the need for things like Head Start. Talk to your kids, use a lot of words with your kids, and a lot of kids enter. I mean, the from peak to trough, some kids enter kindergarten, for instance, knowing, I don't know, 30, 40, 50,000 words, and some know, a fraction of that. And I mean, that's a huge advantage, disservice, et cetera. So yeah, I think letting your kids play and being intentional around reading to them, talking with them, using a lot of words gives them a good foundation of just kind of an exploratory mindset, socially and intellectually. Yeah,
Do you think you can teach, say, an 8-year-old critical thinking?
I do. And as we discussed with your own kids, it's a lot of the kind of school educator talk is going from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, which to me really speaks more fundamentally to don't underestimate your kid and don't get in their way. Like stay out of their way, let them think, let them explore. And to your point, I'm amazed, per our conversation the other day, an 8-year-old absolutely can and is and should be entrepreneurial. They can think in those terms. They're not gonna I mean, some abstract thought and whatever is not developmentally there yet, but conceptually, this is one I kind of a mantra in my time as an educator. You know, my mentor Chuck would say, respect the pupil. The way I kind of internalized it was don't underestimate the pupil.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think often, parents, teachers, adults in children's lives want to put too much control and too much constraint and assume what they can't do. And it's like, just get out of their way. I mean, a lot of modern day anxiety is parents messaging to their, you know, child of whatever age, hey, you're not capable, I better help you.
Well, that's because the parents were probably treated that way when they were children.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really fascinating. I think the whole child rearing thing is fascinating, and uh, I think I told you that you know I started treating my children as adults as early as I could because I wanted them to think, have critical thinking, wanted them to be able to discern what's going on and why things were the way they were and why they weren't the way they should be, and and it worked out really well. But you have to be willing to let them have their own mind, and I think it's hard for parents to do that.
I think, yeah, to your point, my oldest was less than two when it was abundantly clear to me that I'm not in control of this person and I don't need to pretend to be.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It is that way, and you can find a lot of YouTube videos online that it really capture that wildness of children at a young age and how they're in a certain sense uncontrollable.
Yeah. I do think another kind of go-to saying that came from Chuck, the guy that he was the first person to hire me as a middle school director 20 whatever years ago. And I worked with him for 3 years. And then sadly, he got a brain tumor and passed away. So he passed away, I guess, over 20 years ago.
Wow.
I still quote that guy just about every day, which is such a neat thing to be able to do because he was so wise. And it's just neat to kind of have Chuck still be with us today in that sense. Um, in addition to respect the pupil, which was a go-to, he talked about how challenges are always coupled with opportunities.
Hmm.
And um, there's a lot of challenges of being a parent today. What do I do about this AI stuff? How do I keep my kids safe from online? Blah, blah, blah. there's also so much opportunity. And to your point of, you did something that was perhaps a less typical or less common path when you did it. Post-COVID, parents are looking at all kinds of ways to, have their kid homeschooled or in a homeschool consortium or in a half-day school or finding a school that'll work with them around their travel schedule. And I think that's going to be a really neat thing to continue to watch develop, which is just more choices and the way that public school and various other forms of school need to be uh, agile in the sense of just being responsive to what people are asking them to do. And I continue to believe that there's going to be more and more people that choose a non-traditional path. And part of that, some seeds were planted during COVID. Part of that with the way AI is going to just change jobs, change workflows, change what people need to know. There's going to be a lot of opportunity in that to just, look at your life and say, well, as a family or as an individual or whatever, what do we want this to look like? It doesn't have to look like the person to the left or the person to the right. To your point of like work at 2 in the morning, sure, if that works for you, do it.
So, as someone who was the head of school, you're responsible for the school, and you're responsible for your staff and your faculty and your students, and you're responsible for the relationship that families have to the school. Yeah, there's huge responsibility there. So how do you manage that? How do you take that entire thing and make it work so that it doesn't crush you?
That is a fantastic question. And that's part of my journey was we got feedback at my school, I think it was 3 years ago. You guys are we had this outside group do this kind of well-being survey, and like, you did a great job. You're in the 90 whatever percentile. And then they went on to say, only 50% of your teachers are experiencing burnout. Full stop. I can appreciate, relative criterion, but I'm not going to celebrate half half the people being some level of burned out. And it was a moment for me too, kind of like holding up the mirror in an honest way of I'm probably in that 50%, back to just the ways in a pastoral kind of role. You can get worn out. And that's been a lot of what my coaching has been about, of especially as I'm working with some school leaders, how to help them as they're leading all the others and caring for others. How are you caring for yourself? And to get our heads around a phrase I used, still use, the selfishness of selflessness, back to like when the airplane, when the oxygen thing, you got to do get yourself first or you're not useful to anyone else. I think so many people enter um, pastoral roles, teaching roles, educator roles because we want to serve. And we see it as kind of like selfish and wrong to like take care, like self-care becoming this like indulgent term. And it's like, no, 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 no. If you're not taking care of yourself, you can't pour from an empty cup. That's a lot of what motivates me working with school leaders now is the median person working in schools right now, teacher, administrator, whatever the role, if you ask them how it's going, you're going to hear some version of I'm tired, this is really hard. And it's like, yeah, this is really hard. So, what do we do about it? To your point, part of what I found increasingly from my first year of leading a school to my last, the number of hours in a traditional sense of working went down each year because I acknowledged, I need to go see my counselor on Tuesday mornings. I need to go to these meetings. I need to go do, X, Y, or Z. And and things like, all right, on Thursdays at 4 o'clock, I'm going to leave my office, put on my shoes, and walk around. Like we had a cross country trail. I'd walk around campus. And it's like that was a great way to just process the day. And I was working, but really more than anything, I was doing something I really enjoy, which is going on a nice, walk or hike and kind of quietly just praying for the community. And like that was still doing my job, but it was decidedly different than feeling this compulsion to like empty my inbox before I could go home or stay behind the computer. And I found that the quality of my work went up as I gave myself permission to do those kinds of things. And the efficiency of things like knocking out a task like email, I became better at it as I had better strategies for it and I didn't kind of let it control me, I controlled it.
Do you feel the systems were, whether intentional or not, were designed for you to feel that you were in control and that that control was really what it meant to be responsible, and that sense of control was not healthy? It's not healthy because you can't be in control of everything.
Yes. Um, and I feel like there's just this, to use faith language, there's just a lot of false idols, that we hold up busyness and productivity and
Yeah.
tiredness and some other things as if they're to be celebrated. And it's like, no, busy is busy. You know? But I agree. I think one of the idols that we dangle out there is this kind of false sense of control. And to me, in my faith journey and just generally as a human, hopefully this correlates with some sort of maturing and wisdom and whatever, favorable descriptors. It's an acknowledgement increasingly, seemingly every day, more and more that I'm really not in control of very much. And I love that saying because I find it to be true of, we're in control of our actions and our attitude. And that's a good reminder back to the multitude of things. I was talking to a friend earlier today about zones of control. And sometimes I'll kind of like chart that while someone's talking, like on a coaching call, and just point out, hey, the last 8 things you commented on are outside of your control. And I agree with you. I think we create this kind of way of being where we try to convince ourselves, I'm in control and I've got this. And no, no. I uh I think I'm pretty sure this was John Mark Comer on a podcast talking about how I think he said he was citing somebody from some I don't remember who he was quoting, but I'm pretty sure it was him that was saying this, that a person's personality is basically the way they've figured out how to navigate the world to try to minimize suffering. And I thought that was pretty
I agree
interesting.
with
And
that.
to your point, I think under that umbrella, we warp things and try to convince ourselves we're in control of things, and thus things can be controlled. And that's often not true.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much agree with that. And to that point, I think that you can never be happy without suffering. That
Mhm.
suffering is the pathway to happiness, and that's and I see that in. I mean, I know a lot of people, and some of them are school teachers, and some are school administrators, and some are business people. Some have their own business. Some work for corporations. I mean, it's all over the map, but they all feel in some way not in control of the things they want to be in control of. And what
Mhm.
they want to be in control of is, I think, the relationships to the people who are the most important to their job. In the case of a teacher, it's their students. And oftentimes they don't feel like they can do with them what they really want to do for
Mhm.
whatever reason. And because the system doesn't allow it or whatever it may be. And yeah, I think that's part of the challenge that we all face.
Yeah, and I'll undoubtedly keep thinking about systems after we finish this conversation. I'm still processing that back to like, does the system or do these systems set us up for success? And often not, because for instance, if I use school as an example, since we've been talking about, so much of the operating system of school is based on efficiency and performance. Neither of those metrics are very useful going forward. Because performance is going to be more nuanced. Back to gosh, what's the guy's John Doerr. I don't know if it's Doer, but I think the name of the book is Measure What Matters. And the point of the book, in effect, is, a lot of the things that we measure them because they're easy to measure.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And I
it's,
think there's this fixation on, again, productivity and efficiency that's still clearly traces back to, how the current operating system of school was shaped, which was the industrial era. And it's like, all right, we're not preparing kids for that, but the operating system lags. So the system creates this kind of dissonance in the people participating in it, and that creates the anxiety and kind of dysregulation that we're increasing, in my opinion, increasingly seeing where people are just dysregulated because, well, you know, adults, you're telling me as a student I need to be risk-taking and entrepreneurial, but I'm sitting here in this efficiency model, and you're telling me I also have to be perfect. I am like three shades of confused on a daily basis.
that's the picture of the world we live in organizationally. And that's what I've seen, for 50 years of working in organizations of all kinds and wondering what's the end point of that. I mean, I don't think it's sustainable. And I think we're coming to the end of that. But the question is what what follows, and that's something very different, I think.
Yeah, great question. I refer to it as the rubber band snap. At what point does the rubber band get stretched out? And to your point, when it recoils, like where does that settle? And there's a lot of examples right now, like when Jonathan Haidt wrote The Anxious Generation, and parents really started watching it and reading it and paying attention to him. There is kind of a parent movement of, I probably should wait a little longer before my kid has a supercomputer. Okay, don't give them a phone until they're, he would say 18 or at least 16. But I'm seeing that play out where it's like, all right, we gave for a decade or so there, we gave people these tools where we really haven't prepared them for them, haven't given them any expectations. Let's come back off of that a little bit. And I use that as an example because there's so many others. We're going to see that as a human race with AI, where it's like, all right, I watched something last week where this guy no, Paul Tudor Jones was
Yeah.
back from a top AI conference, and he was very clear and got emotional on CNBC during the interview, talking about how clear it is that AI needs regulation, and that the people in the room, the people that are creating these large language models, were quick to say the same, that, please, let's create regulation. Let's make sure we're thoughtful about what we're doing here. And from the tenor of what he was saying, it's already like we're already behind in terms of getting regulation. I remember, again, I don't, this was an internet safety speaker probably 20 years ago. And in it, a couple things stood out and have stuck with me for all this time. The main one being that technology is going to outpace morality. You get these new tools, you play with them, and then you realize, ooh, we gotta think this through. So again, even just using technology as an example, I agree with you that, you know, people are being intentional. I talked to a friend earlier today, and we were talking about how we need to take Instagram off of our phones because you just end up checking it more than you should when it's on your phone. It's like, how do we rein it in? How do we have accountability partners? How do we delete apps? How do we do things to better regulate ourselves so that we have real experiences in the real world versus dopamine hits with our technological toys?
I agree with that, but I don't think it's the answer
I don't
because
think that is, I think that is part of something. I don't know that it's the core because, to
because
your
I
point,
I think what we're dealing with, we've been dealing with the imposition of modern technology for, well, since the beginning of the industrial age.
agreed.
And the modern industrial factory was not built around a moral universe that was supportive of people. It was built around a moral universe that placed maximization of profits at the front. The people that I have worked with, there are two types of people that I've worked with over the years that I think, whether they know it or not, they were doing what I think is the way to operate. One is that the I'm thinking of what this one CEO of this one company. He came there and he didn't tell them anything about what his plans were. And
Mm.
after 3 months, he hired me to come in and write a value statement. And I had 9 people. I had top executives and the officers of the trade union, and we wrote a value statement that he ended up agreeing to. And then he took that value statement. They created a training program for middle managers to develop the leadership capacities of the lowest echelon of the people who work for the company. And
Mm.
so that idea and the way what he did with those first 3 or 4 months was not talk about what he wanted to do. It wasn't his projection of his ego into the company. It was rather, who are you? And he would meet with people who are just blue collar workers. He'd meet them for breakfast. I mean, he was meeting people and getting to know them by name, getting to know their families, their children. And so by the time our our value statement was complete, he had been there for seven months. He had earned the right to say, "This is where we want to go," and they wanted to go with him.
I love that. Back to, when you say systems, systems of what? Is it systems of productivity? Is it a system of people? And what you're describing there is an actual, focus on a culture that's about people first. And that's compelling. And that's what, in my experience, that's what people want to be part of. They want to feel, I don't know what your values statement said, but within that kind of focus, just the dignity of the individual. I've got a name, I've got a story, I matter. I might be a blue collar person or not a higher up, but I'm not a commodity. I'm, whatever the person's name is. I think that's to your point of this was kind of Paul Tudor's point talking about the AI. It was a conference of a bunch of tech people acknowledging that, hey, we're looking at this from a pretty narrow band. Back to his statistic was only 10% of them uh, kind of believed in the concept of humans having a soul. And it's like, all right, well, that's not necessarily representative of the masses. That sounds like a subset of people. And so where I go with that is as we're creating systems of what to do what are we trying to optimize? And if it's human flourishing, that's very different than profit maximization.
Well, here's the value statement for Dayton Power and Light. We are
Cool.
DPL. We are united in purpose to safely serve our customers, communities, and industry. We value respect and trust, integrity and pride. We care about DPL being a great company. And then it describes the thing. And within 2 years of implementing this program, they were recognized by Forbes as being one of the 100 most trustworthy companies in the nation.
Love it.
But the other piece of this that I think is worth helping people see, and I see this particularly true for schools, is that I began to see that in the best companies, or the companies that were the most resilient, was there was something not about the leadership of the company, but about the people. And I came up with this way of talking about it as there is a persistent residual culture of values that
Mm,
persists because it resides in the relationships of the people.
mm,
And where I found was that people who love the company where they work, even if
mhm,
they had really bad leadership, would give their best to the company, and they all were kind of in agreement and for that to do. So those two things are kind of we need a value statement, and we need to be together as a people of the company.
I love that. And I love that it's consistent with, what you've said and written about with leadership, which is that's not about being in some title or some role. That's how you live your life and how you can be about giving to others, relationships, kindness, civility. And when people ask me about the future of education, that's kind of where I land is, as a human race, where do we want to, put our flag in the sand? Let's live the golden rule. Okay. How do we help practice and live that out? And what I like about your example, Lencioni's written a lot about this with people claim them as core values, but they're actually aspirational or just kind of generic. It's like, what are actually the core values? Well, what are the behaviors demonstrated on a daily basis? Those are your core values. So if it's being kind to each other and living a statement like that read, awesome. For a
How do
lot
you
of,
measure respect? How do you measure trust? How do you measure integrity? How do you measure pride in the
yeah.
company? I mean, it's that those are questions that don't have an answer up front. They're ones that come from having conversation about it.
Yeah, and that's another theme I love talking about, which is, another word that's worth putting under the microscope is efficiency. I love that healthy cultures, healthy relationships, massively inefficient because it's about having conversations. Like there's no my chat bot can't talk to your chat bot and now we're buddies. Like, no, we gotta talk. And that when I think of what see I wrote this I was actually at Lot 63 where we met. This was, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks ago. I was there on a Saturday. My kids were going, here and there. So I had a Saturday morning. I sat there for a few hours and I wrote this it's a letter to the title. I ended up calling it Open on Your 18th Birthday. And it's a letter to my great great grandkid, whoever that might be. And it was just kind of a fun story, of just, or a letter of just kind of what I hope is true when you open this. Here's the world I hope you're inheriting. And it was a fun little thought exercise for Saturday morning back to what strikes me as possible for humanity if we really can, to your point, um, have this kind of distributed leadership, this shared understanding of what we want culture and community to be about. And it is difficult to measure.
Yeah.
These qualitative things like connection and relationships and trust and integrity. Okay. Like there's no quick way to 8.7 that. I mean, you just got to kind of experience and talk and keep at it. And I think that's to your point of kind of coming away from the limits of one thing and settling back in some other direction. I hope that's where humanity is headed, in terms of just reflecting on why do I feel anxious? What's missing? How can it start with me? And how can I be the person that the people around me deserve? And if everyone takes on that mindset, okay. I mean, we all have our flaws and our faults, but gracious, if we put relationships and sincere, authentic connection as kind of goals, and what I like thinking about is back to what's within our control without not within our control. What inputs for a company or an organization or an individual, what inputs do I actually have control over? And I really don't need to pay much attention to outputs. I can reasonably guess that the company, that the Dayton Power Company you're just talking about, I can reasonably guess that 3 years after you did that, they had improved financials. Like the outputs followed.
They were the top electric utility in the company in the country.
Yeah, there you go. And
They
that
were a
surprised me.
medium-sized company, so it was remarkable. It was remarkable.
And that's where, I mean, I played a lot of sports growing up, still love a lot of different sports. one of the things that was clear that some people have given me vocabulary. Joe Ehrman has given a lot of coaches vocabulary for transactional versus transformational. Who are the coaches that are talking about the inputs and how to be your best every day and practice? And the ones talking about winning the championships, yeah, good luck. You know,
Yeah.
you're spending this energy on this output thing. Just fixate on the inputs. Outputs will take care of themselves. People ask me like, how'd you grow enrollment? I was in school leadership positions for 20 years, and all 20 years we had enrollment growth. I was 20 for 20. And they're like, wow, how'd you do that? Focused on the inputs. Outputs took care of themselves, make it a great place to be, and more
So
people want to be here.
let's take that little thing as there is a place to jump off for the last thing we talk about,
Okay.
because we were introduced to one another within the context of talking about our community. We live in
Hmm.
Winston-Salem, and
Hmm.
we're talking about how do we, as a collection of people who are writers and speakers and leaders, how do we, in our relationships with one another, do things that help advance the kinds of things we're talking about for our community? And I'm curious as to what you see there. And uh, I do see that we have something to offer, but what is it that you think, having been here for as long as you have, what is it you think that would be a step forward for our community if we could motivate or facilitate some advancement in that area?
Great question. For me, the answer is probably as simple and as challenging as people spending more time in connection with other people and getting on, getting off screens, getting, outside of their homes, take the time to talk to the neighbor on the way in. Just being good neighbors and being civically minded, being I'm an introvert, but being socially oriented in the sense of like we're not doing anything by ourselves. We've got each other. How do we encourage a sense of uh, connection and relationship? If I had to pick a word that is what is enduring about what it means to be human, relationships. So, and as we just discussed, like that's not efficient. That's not, I have my top 9 friends pinned on my phone and I make sure I send them a text each morning. Like, okay, that maybe people do exactly that and that cool. And how are you in connection with them and talking with folks? And that's what I love. I mean, for instance, the very place we met at 63, part of what I love about it and have loved about it since since they started planning it, it's it's kind of a microcosm of what I'm imagining. There's just all walks of life walk through there. People get to be in great conversations there. Spontaneous conversations spark per the very fact that you and I met because we were sitting 10 feet apart and ended up talking to each other.
Yeah.
Uh, I love that. And how do we have that more? What I am finding, um, I've quoted this so many times since I heard Jack Johnson, the musician, say this on an interview a couple months ago. Well, I heard it a couple months ago. I don't know when it was recorded. Um, he encourages his kids to create more than they consume. I would want to add to that, create and connect more than you consume. So as opposed to being this person passively living your life, doom scrolling and binge watching and whatever, go have a great conversation. Go write something, go create something. If you're creating things and you're connecting with others, that's probably a pretty good start at like healthiness, you know?
Yeah.
And conversely, if you're not creating anything and you're not feeling connected to others, you're probably not thriving.
I find that there is the mindset that a lot of people have that they not the ones responsible for whatever it is they're in, whether it's their business, their school, maybe even their family, or and in particular their community. That they're not really responsible. Someone else is responsible, and they're just to be the beneficiaries of that. And and I think um, that's a mindset that will lead to suffering and demise because there's only one way to improve things, and that's take responsibility. And
1,000% agreed. And this is where I get this is one of the last conversations I had with our mutual friend Ned of how we acculturate that kind of thing. Back to not only like explicit curricula, like, stated learning target kind of stuff in schools, but just how, to your point of the culture at the power company, it's just like in the water. Like, how is it just in the water that like I just know and understand that I want to be personally responsible so that you can count on me and I can be a great teammate and I can be a great community member. Like how does that simply just matter to me? In ways that I see and understand, and even probably more powerfully, even in ways that I don't see and understand. But it's just kind of in the water that like that is normative, that you want to be personally responsible.
yeah, that's good. Well, we're trying. We're going to do it together, and
There you go. There you
and
go.
the more people that want to be a part of that, we welcome you to do that. We don't know, the thing we've kind of started is just a conversation. We don't know where it goes. I mean, we're going to keep talking, and if more people want to talk with us, all the better. And if we had 10,000 people wanting to talk, that'd be pretty cool. I don't know how we'd manage that, but I'm not worried about that. But if
I'm not either.
10,000 people wanted to say, I want to be responsible for my community. How do I do that? I think we could figure out a way to make that work.
To your point, and I think that's the way forward. It's one conversation at a time.
Yeah.
It's the spark and the encouragement and the connection with other people where it's like, by having this conversation, I'm going to stand a little bit taller the rest of the day. You know what I mean? Just and that feeling, again, hard to put words to it, hard to measure it, but it feels good, and that's very much what I hope for people that hey, I want to be a positive contributor to my community. Um, I want to be a curious learner so that I can get more skilled at doing so. I want to be humble enough to admit that I don't know way more than I do know, and that'll always be true. And if people can start there, as I'm trying to start there, a lot strikes me as possible.
I totally agree. Totally agree. Well, thank you for joining me today. It's been fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Thank you.
I am certain that this could have gone on for another hour or two. Um,
Well, to be continued. We will be continuing our conversation. Yeah,
and maybe what we'll do is we'll do an Eddie event and invite people to come and talk.
well, that could
Now
be
I'm just
fun.
that just popped in my head, so I'm gonna mull that over and see what can come from that. Gardner, thank you for who you are and what you've done and what you've given to this community and what's going to come from your life going forward. And I'm so glad to know you.
Well, right back at you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And we thank you for watching and listening. And I hope that you take away from this that you have a power that um, other people don't have because it's yours, and
Mm.
you take responsibility for making something good come from your life. And if you need here's just a little piece of action for you that you've not heard this from me yet, Gardner. If you want to decide to be responsible, then decide to be grateful. And if you don't know what it means to be grateful, meaning you don't feel very grateful in your heart and you don't feel very grateful, then do these 5 things. I call these the 5 actions of gratitude. Say thanks to someone, give back to something or some group, make people who are new welcome in your organization, honor others. Don't wait to give them the gold watch when they retire. Honor them all the time, every week, every day. Honor them in some way, and then go create goodness. And if you were to practice those 5 things every day, every week, every month, your life will be transformed, and you will have people following you, not so much following you, but wanting to join you because you have created something which other people actually want to be a part of. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about here. So I encourage you to do that. And we'll keep talking about this kind of stuff here at the Eddie Network Podcast. And I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye bye.